Hello, and welcome to video number 2. This one is specifically focusing on vocal weight. First up, a little bit of welcome and intro. If you haven't seen one of these videos before, a little bit about me. I'm not a speech pathologist, and I'm not a career professional, so this isn't something that I do as my day-to-day job, but I do have 20 plus years of vocal experience, most of that in singing, some of it in acting, some of it in voice acting, some of it in content creation, and then more recently, vocal feminization. And also, I am currently learning to teach from a career professional. So the person who taught me how to adjust my voice, who taught me vocal feminization, is now teaching me how to teach vocal feminization. I'm learning from her, getting some good examples, getting some good exercises, that kind of thing. So I am getting my information from a valuable source. Tips for healthy practice as we get started here. Always warm up before you start practicing. It's very important for your voice. It's very important to make sure you don't hurt yourself. You want to make sure you warm up before any session, no matter how long or how short. You also want to make sure that you keep hydrated throughout your sessions. Water is your best option. There are a couple other options that you could potentially use, but generally speaking, I recommend just sticking with water and staying away from anything that's caffeinated, anything that's got a lot of sugar in it, and anything that's carbonated. Basically, anything that's going to irritate your throat, dry out your throat, or cause some other sort of obstruction or issue when it comes to the way that you speak. You want to make sure that if you feel any signals from your body, you stop right away. So if you feel any pain, strain, or tension, make sure to stop, make sure to give yourself some rest. Generally speaking, I find that if you've sort of gotten to the point where you're feeling any of those things, you want to make sure that you take the rest of the day to rest, unless you're very, very aware of the limits and stamina of your body. So otherwise, just let it be for the rest of the day so that you can start up again tomorrow. And finally, there are some exercises out there that recommend catching a swallow as a means of sort of adjusting your larynx. Don't do this. It's very sort of tough on your throat at best, and it can lead to, worst case scenarios of like choking and things like that. So definitely don't do this. It's quite dangerous, or it can be. So we don't want anybody to hurt themselves. And finally, general path, the way that I was taught and the way that I teach is to have whoever's learning go to sort of the maximum of whatever it is we're learning and then slowly dial it back. I find that it generally helps for people to sort of get out of old habits and find that sort of stronger distinction, figure out what they're engaging or changing to make that change happen. And then you can sort of start dialing it back once you have a bit more awareness of what you're using, what pieces of the voice that you're using. So let's go over what vocal weight is to start with. At the most technical, vocal weight is the amount of vocal fold mass that you're letting collide when you make any sounds with your voice. So you've got your vocal folds just above where you're sort of just like sort of partway up your vocal tract after your air leaves your lungs. Your air moves past your vocal folds and gets them to start vibrating together. As they vibrate together, they produce the sound that will eventually be your voice. That'll come out of your mouth as your voice. So what we want to do when it comes to vocal weight is find the muscles we need to engage at the vocal fold area and around it that will engage or disengage to make the voice thinner or thicker. A thin vocal weight is one that's sort of more breathy, more soft, more whispery. This is a voice where the vocal folds are not engaged as much or not colliding as thickly when you're speaking. So there's a lot less mass colliding when you sort of move that air past those vocal folds and get them vibrating. Thicker vocal weights, on the other hand, which I've just changed to now, are a fair bit louder, brassier. They can be stronger and helpful for projection, and they can help with clarity or speaking in loud environments. This is one reason why I tend to teach thicker vocal weights, even when a lot of people are sort of more interested in thinning their vocal weight out, because it's a very useful tool to have in your back pocket just in case you need it. Thicker vocal weights involve more interaction between your vocal folds, more vocal fold mass colliding at once when you speak. So it's a sort of the opposite of what we were just talking about a second ago. Think of it like the difference between if you clap with your hands at exactly the same distance, changing the amount of volume coming from your hands without changing the amount of distance between them. When you smack your hands together, that's sort of like what your vocal folds are doing in your throat. If you only pull them like 3 inches apart or so, you can clap quietly by just sort of allowing some skin contact, not a lot of impact. They're not really smacking together all that hard. Versus if you pull them the same distance apart but really sort of smack them together, it'll get to the point where you can sort of feel it in the bones of the hand, you can feel it in the muscles of the hand, you can feel it even in the backs of your hands, because more of the mass of your hands is colliding together. So that's the same thing as with our vocal folds, it's just in our throat and not our hands. Same thing, different parts of the body. Let's talk about what vocal weight isn't for a moment. So there's a lot of people who are under the impression that vocal weight is just where you feel the buzzing. So if you feel the buzzing of your voice in a different place, that must mean that you changed your vocal weight. That's not exclusively true. It can happen. It can be a change that you'll notice, but it isn't always the case, and it isn't the case for every adjustment of vocal weight that you make. We want to make sure that this isn't our means of identifying whether our vocal weight is changing. We want to make sure that we sort of can identify the difference by hearing it rather than by a sort of trying to feel physical reference of it. And it's also not exclusively the volume at which we speak. I can speak quite a bit louder and still maintain this sort of same thinner vocal weight. It hasn't gotten any thicker, or not much thicker anyway, but it's gotten quite a bit louder. It's gotten quite a bit more to the point where I could project it if I really wanted to. So you can change the volume to the point where you can even make a very thick vocal weight quite quiet. It's not the kind of thing where you have to change the volume to change the vocal weight, or change the vocal weight to change the volume. Those two things aren't tied together, but they do sort of go hand in hand. They're the kind of thing that if you're going to be, sort of looking for more volume or that kind of thing, vocal weight might be a good tool to help, but you don't want to have them, stuck together all the time. How do we affect our vocal weight? So the big thing here is we're going to change how much air is required to cause our vocal folds to vibrate rather than staying closed. So we were talking before about engaging or disengaging the muscles around our vocal folds. We're going to engage them such that if we're looking to thicken our vocal weight, we're going to engage them such that it takes more air to get them vibrating. And once they get vibrating, they're hitting together quite a bit more mass, like we were talking about with the clapping example. Or vice versa, if we're looking to thin our vocal weight, we're going to disengage the muscles around the vocal folds, or sort of lessen the amount of pressure, which will cause the vocal folds to vibrate quite a bit more easily. Less air will be required to get them moving, but more air will move past them that doesn't cause them to vibrate. That's where this sort of breathy sound comes from. What do we need to be careful of when it comes to sort of experimenting, practicing, sort of exploring our vocal weight? The first one is always going to be vocal strain. This is true of any time you're working on your voice with any sort of different piece that you've never worked on before. It's a matter of being careful with yourself and, trying things that are new. If you're flexing a muscle you've never flexed before, it's going to get sore pretty quick. So you want to make sure that you're very careful about your stamina, and making sure that you're stopping when you get to the point where you can feel anything that's not quite right. Unintentional fry or breathiness are two pieces we want to be aware of too. So if you find that you're talking like this a lot of the time and you can't really seem to get yourself out of that breathy sound, you can't really add more weight to your voice, or this is something that's happening without you meaning for it to happen, that's something we want to be aware of, and something that we want to be able to adjust before we sort of carry on with the rest of our vocal training. We don't want that breathiness to become a habit that we can't change. It's unlikely that you'll ever get to a point where you're really sort of stuck in it, but the sooner you can get to the point where you're adjusting it on purpose, the better. Same goes for if we're adding a lot of vocal fry all the time. This is something that can be a little bit more towards causing yourself additional vocal strain. This can be something that can be a little bit damaging to the voice if left unchecked for too long, or if done too significantly. So this is one you also want to check to make sure that you're not doing unintentionally, one that's just sort of sneaking in by accident. You want to make sure that if you're going to be applying vocal fry to your voice, that you're doing it on purpose and you're using it sort of more as a tool. Tension is next up on our list here. So as you're sort of practicing, especially when it comes to vocal weight, tension can be a big thing, in the throat especially. If you're feeling any tension, make sure that you do what you can to relax it. And if it doesn't go away, maybe take a break for a while, come back to it, and experiment with some new stuff once you've sort of let that tension unwind itself again. This can be particularly common in vocal weight, so make sure that you pay extra attention to whether you're having any tension in your throat. And finally, unbalanced practice is the last one we want to be careful of. We want to be sure that we're practicing both thick and thin vocal weights for a lot of reasons. The first is that it's a sort of important piece for making sure you can adjust your voice to exactly that sort of sweet spot that you want it in. If you only learn how to thin your vocal weight, if you get to the point where you actually sort of overshoot your goal and get a little bit too thin, you're not going to really have the knowledge to sort of thicken it back up and get to the sort of point that you're looking for. it's helpful to be able to adjust both ways. And the other reason why is because sometimes you need to make yourself heard urgently or quickly, or over a long distance or in a loud environment. And we don't want you to be stuck in a situation where you can't make yourself heard loudly, without sort of defaulting to an old voice that makes you dysphoric or uncomfortable. We want to make sure that you have access to something that is at least adjacent to the femme voice that you're aiming for, even when you need to be loud. So thickening up your vocal weight can be a really good way to sort of accomplish this. We want to make sure that you can do that still in a voice that's comfortable for you. So let's go over some exercises, starting with a good warm-up. What we're going to focus on here is lip bubbling. You can also do this by blowing bubbles into your water bottle. It'll be the same thing, just blowing bubbles through a straw into a water bottle or a glass of water, rather than blowing bubbles sort of through your, or making the bubbling sound through your lips. I'll be using the lip bubbling example today, just because it's a lot harder to show the water bottle example on or without a camera. But if you need an example, let me know. We'll see what we can do. But for now, focusing on just lip bubbling, what we're going to do here is make the sound. And we're going to start at the very bottom of our vocal range, slide all the way to the very top of our vocal range, and then slide all the way back down again. So it's going to sound like this. Oh, sorry. And then we're going to do the same thing, but backwards. As we do that exercise, the main thing we want to be focusing on is keeping that lip trill at the same speed, the same sort of frequency. We don't want it to speed up as we get higher and then slow down as we get lower again. We want it to stay the same speed all the way through. So that's our warm-up for vocal weight. There's not a ton for these, but these are really helpful exercises just generally, so I highly recommend doing a bunch of those. Next up are the exercises themselves. So we're going to start with H phrases here. What we're going to do is use the words heat, hat, heart, and home. We're going to say each of those words, and we're going to extend the H sound at the front of each word to start with. So it's going to sound like this. Heat, hat, heart, home. Heat, hat, heart, home. And you're going to focus on trying to get that open H sound to sort of encompass the rest of the word, to sort of extend itself to the rest of the word that you're using. So that sort of breathier, softer sound, you want to extend that to as much of what you're saying as you possibly can. Once you get the hang of that, we're going to start putting those words into phrases instead. So it's going to sound something like this. The phrases I use are heat from fire, fire from heat, home is where the heart is, and I put on my hat. And what we're going to do is basically the same thing as we were doing for the words to start with. We're just going to try and extend that open H sound to the rest of the phrase as well. So definitely to the word that we're using it on, but also to the rest of the phrase as we say it. It's going to sound like this. Heat from fire, fire from heat. Heat from fire, fire from heat. Home is where the heart is. Home is where the heart is. Home is where the heart is. I put on my hat. I put on my hat. I put on my hat. Again, wanting to try and extend that sort of open H sound to the rest of the words, but without whispering. You don't want to be sort of, I put on my hat. You don't want to be doing it such that you don't have any tone in the voice at all. You just want to be reducing the amount of vocal weight that's going on at once. As you do this, you want to make sure that you're sort of focusing on the area around where your vocal folds are, sort of further down in your throat. You want to sort of feel the difference that's sort of going on there. You want to feel, the muscles that are engaging or disengaging, and get a feel for how you might engage or disengage them without the use of these exercises, so that you can adjust your vocal weight as you speak. Moving to the exact opposite end of the spectrum now, we're going to go to a sort of thickening exercise. We're going to thicken up our vocal weight. I will be doing this exercise off microphone because it gets quite loud, but you'll probably still be able to hear what's going on here. We're going to go back to those lip trills we were doing just a second ago when we were warming up, but this time we're going to focus on just one pitch, and we're going to focus on intensifying the buzz at the lips and the hum in our chest. So what we're going to sound like is this. Yeah, yeah, yeah. This thickens up the vocal weight quite a bit, changes the way that the voice sounds, makes it quite a bit louder, makes it quite a bit easier for it to sort of project or be heard over loud environments, that kind of thing. So it's just a matter of the biggest piece is the intensifying of the sound in the chest, especially. We do want to do the buzzing at the lips or a little bit more quickly as well, just to sort of get the two pieces working together. But generally speaking, the biggest piece is that sort of hum in your chest. You want to intensify the volume there as you do these. Be extra careful when it comes to this exercise, especially when you're getting used to it. Speaking with a very thick vocal weight can be quite tiring on the voice, so be extra careful that you're not sort of overdoing it or pushing yourself when you hear or when you feel those sort of signals that indicate that maybe it's time to stop. While we're here in the sort of thicker end of our vocal weight, we're also going to explore vocal fry a little bit. So vocal fry is that sort of kind of sound, or in speech it sounds kind of like this when we've got that sort of buzz going on in the back of the voice. Not necessarily if it's a scratchy sound, but more of the sort of clicking or more of the sort of individual pops that you can sort of hear going on in the voice right now. It can sound a little bit scratchy, but it shouldn't feel scratchy in your throat. The reason we want to explore fry a little bit is because some people like to use it as a tool. You don't want to be using it unintentionally. We were talking about that in the sort of things to be careful of section. So we want to make sure that the fry is happening on purpose. If it's something that you want to use and you're using intentionally, that's great. If it's something that you're using unintentionally, we want to be pretty careful to take that out right away and then start learning how to apply it intentionally if that's something you want to learn to do again. What we're going to do here is go to our thicker sound, and we're just going to say the word ah, and we're going to try and thicken it up and thicken it up and thicken it up until it gets to the point where you can really sort of hear that ah sound going on. It's going to sound like this. Ah, 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 ah. Obviously, it may take some more practice for you to get the hang of this. I've had a little bit of experience with this, so it may take a little bit longer for you, but it's just a matter of trying to thicken up that ah sound until you can start to hear that sort of ah going on, and then trying to sort of learn what it feels like in your voice as you produce that sound. Finally, we're going to go to an exercise that helps us go back and forth between the two sort of extremes of our vocal weights. So ah is a really nice sound for getting to sort of your thinner end of your vocal weights, whereas a very emphatic, very disgusted ew has that sort of thickness already sort of associated with it, already intuitively attached. What we're going to do here is use these back and forth as a means of switching from one to the other, then back. You could start at either end, but before I do this, I'm going to take a quick break for water. This is how you can tell that these videos aren't edited. And what we're going to do here is start with whatever sort of side of the voice that we choose. So in my case, I'm going to choose the sort of thinnest end that I can get to. So this sort of very, very thin, very almost whispery sound. And what we're going to do is start with the side that's closest to us. So for me, that's ah. And then switch to the side that's furthest away. So ah, ew, ah, ew, ew, ew. And you want to make sure that those are sort of applying their separate vocal weights, the different pieces that we sort of associate with those vocal weights. You want that nice sort of breathy, soft sound when it comes to that ah. You want that almost up to the point where you're frying with that emphatic ew sound. You can also do these in reverse if you find that your voice is already quite thick and you want to be moving back to that sort of softer sound. So you can go with ew, ah, ew, ah, to bring you back to that sort of nice, soft, warm sound. If you find that your voice is already quite thick and you're aiming for something to move yourself downwards again. These are sort of the pieces that we want to sort of start focusing on having a pretty good handle on when it comes to sort of chatting with other people or that kind of thing. But it can take some time to practice, so make sure that you give yourself lots of time, lots of space. Make sure that this isn't something that you're doing unintentionally, and if it is, start trying to work at the other end of the voice, such that it brings you away from any habits that you're already in, or any unintentional things that may be caused by the way that your vocal weight already sounds. Again, if you have any questions, there's a Discord server that I'm in that if you're coming to this video, you probably are already a member of. So if you'd like to send me any questions, please feel free. And otherwise, make sure you take a lot of time at the end of your practice sessions, if you still have some stamina left, to just explore, experiment, try different things. These exercises are all great, but at the end of the day, we want to be applying this to the way that our voice actually sounds, the way that we want to speak. So make sure you give yourself some time to try and speak in these new vocal weights that you're exploring. See if you can apply it while also sort of producing a standard speech. Trying to make it as conversational as possible is generally the way I recommend going, but obviously that doesn't work for some folks. If it doesn't work for you, there are the Harvard phrases that you can use. Again, if you need a link to those, you can certainly hit me up. But also they are very Googleable. If you look up if you Google Harvard transgender feminization phrases, you'll probably find what I'm talking about. But yeah, so that's it for this video. Hopefully it was helpful, and hopefully you have a great rest of your day. Okay, bye.